Now we come to the most innovative operational development of the past 50 years, sponsored by the hauler of our train today, GB Rail Freight. Could John Smith, Managing Director, come forward? Here he comes. Now this really is a trip down memory lane, because first up comes the merry-go-round train, MGR. I picked up a couple of copies of Modern Railways from 1963 in a local charity shop, and in one of them, Gerard Fines, the then British Rail's operating director, was writing about merry-go-round, the idea of having fixed formation trains, loading up with coal at a coal mine, driving round, unloading automatically at a power station, going around the loop back to the coal mine and so on. It seemed so very obvious compared with the previous method of loading wagons, shunting them, marshalling yards and so on. But it took a hell of a lot of work to get it going because of course he had to persuade British Rail, Central Electricity Generating Board and the National Coal Board to actually take part and put up money. It's a very interesting story, but MGR was a great scheme, and I suppose it reached its peak with the Selby coal mine, and when Selby disappeared and when we started relying on imported coal, it's gone out of fashion. We now have massive coal trains coming from, some from pits, some from ports, hauled by 66s, hauled by yours. But the MGR was a key technology of its time. Next up is the switch from loco haulage to DMUs on regional railways in the 1980s. This was part of the revolution of Bob Reid's railway, business-led railway, and it's interesting that we forget, as all the DMUs whiz around in the regions, that at one time you had old DMUs, first generation DMUs running around the cities, and the intercity, interurban services were cast off a loco hauled coaching stock, and you might have had 8 coaches every 2 or 3 hours. And in the 1980s it became an all DMU railway. Instead of 8 coaches every 2 or 3 hours, you might have a train every half hour, a DMU every half hour. It was a fundamental change in the market and a very important one. Another one from the 1960s freight sector is the advent of container trains, or as they were called at the time, liner trains. That was another of Fines's innovations. It's ironic that it was designed to move freight around the country, around domestically, and it went along. And then people realised that if you wanted to, when the container revolution started on the high seas, if you had a ship coming in with 10, 20,000 containers, getting rid of them by lorries was not practical. And today the big growth area of rail freight, the one that's seen through the recession, is in fact international container traffic, another crucial development. Back to passengers, Thameslink through services in the 1980s. This was a very simple concept. There was a tunnel, there were railways north of the Thames, there were railways south of the Thames, so why not run trains through railways and make one railway? Well, back in those days, the railways north of the Thames didn't really speak to the railways south of the Thames. The Southern didn't want any of this nasty Midland stuff coming down, and the Northern certainly didn't want, well, they won't have nothing to do with the Southern. But it did happen, and today Thameslink, once again, it was another of those things that became almost an overnight success. It's taken a bit of a while to develop it a bit further, but Thameslink 2000 is probably going to happen around about 2018. So Thameslink really is one of the major developments and also a worthy contender. British Rail was an early IT adopter. And I remember when I came back to writing about railways in the 1970s, I went to a freight depot one evening and I saw these shunters, and in those days you really had shunters with big sticks and big gloves, and they went up to a computer terminal and tapped in. And I said, you know, I hadn't got a computer in those days, I had a portable typewriter. And I said, what are those men doing? And they said, oh, they're entering it on TOPS, Total Operations Processing System. And here we had, in the 1960s railway, people using this system which tracked wagons. And it worked. I remember saying, well, what happens if they don't type it in? He said, well, the wagon is listed wrong, then they have to go out in the wet and check it, so they get it right first time. So, what did our readers consider the most innovative operational development of the past 50 years? This time you chose freight, the advent of container trains.